Hello, everyone, and welcome to your ABA Day 2021 Digital Advocacy Training. My name is Eric Story, and I'm the Director of Grassroots and Digital Advocacy here at the American Bar Association. And today I'm joined by Cliff Johnson of Bloomberg Government. Cliff, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about?
Sure. Thanks, Eric, and thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this very special event. My name is Cliff Johnson. I'm the general manager here at Bloomberg Government, and in addition to creating sort of a product portfolio that services the larger government affairs and public affairs community, we also spend a lot of time doing research so that we can better understand what it is that best-in-class organizations do to improve and increase their effectiveness when it comes to seeking specific policy outcomes.
Thanks, Cliff. That's great. But before we get into some of that, I'd like to run through some of the digital tools that we're actually going to be using this year for ABA Day, and how we can best use those tools to get our messages across and be heard above the noise. But before we jump into all of that, I'd like to answer the question that I think a lot of us are asking, which is, does this actually matter? Does advocating online actually make a difference in the halls of Congress? And I think the answer might surprise you. And for that, I'd like to turn your attention to this Congressional Management Foundation study that went around and asked every congressional office what actually moves the needle for them. And the number one way that they actually get their information is that a visit from a constituent face to face is the best way that we can move the needle in Congress. Now, we can't do that due to the recent pandemic, but we are doing the next best thing. And whenever you sign up for ABA Day, you can go ahead and notify us if you would like to join a teleconference or a Zoom meeting with these members of Congress. It's not quite as good as in person, but it does absolutely give that face-to-face interaction, and it allows us to have that two-way communication street. So if you'd like to join that, please, like I said, notify whenever you register for ABA Day. Then I'd like to turn your attention to the third best way we can move an issue, and I think that's really where the surprising part comes in, and that is actually a unique email from you. This really is kind of shocking because if you'll turn your direction all the way to the second lowest in this chart is actually a visit from a lobbyist. So think about that. An email from you is actually more valuable to them than a visit from one of our lobbyists. Of course, looking right to the left of the visit from the lobbyist is actually a form email. And we can see the difference between this form email impact and the impact of a unique email. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to start with these form emails. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that on our website. And I'm going to show you some tricks on how you can change those form emails really quickly into a unique email and really increase your effectiveness. But of course, that's not the only way that we're going to advocate over ABA Day. And the second way is actually social media. And that same Congressional Management Foundation study asked how many social media posts it takes for your office to actually start paying attention to an email, to grab your attention and really start talking about that issue on the Monday meeting. And actually, almost 80% of offices said up to 30 messages is all it takes to grab their attention. That's pretty staggering considering how many people live in each state for each senator. And even more surprising is 34% of those offices actually said 1 to 10 posts was enough for them. So we have made it as easy as possible for you to go on our toolkit and enter in your first name, your last name, your email address, and your home address. And you'll be given pre-formatted emails and social media posts that you'll either be able to send in a click or take that half second extra, make it your own, improve that effectiveness, and then go ahead and send it off. But before we jump into actually the ins and outs of the tools, I'd like to talk to you really briefly about what we want to include in these messages. And that same CMF study actually asked that information, and the number one thing that offices said was information that directly influences their state and district offices. So what actually matters to their constituents. So we've put together a few resources, some infographics, some one-pagers that do exactly that. The next thing is really your opinion, which is very easy to get across, and the specific ask, which we've actually already put into these things. But the next is really your personal story, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So right now, I'd actually like to jump over and show you some of the tools that we have on our website. So coming from our website, we'll just want to go up here and go to ambar.org/ABA day. And we'll be taken to our toolkit right here. Since we're interested in sending an email right now, we're going to scroll past the registration link and the schedule of events, and we're going to look right here to this option. Clicking here, you'll actually be taken to our messaging portal, and you'll be given some information here on the left-hand side. Now, if you're going there the day of ABA Day, you'll see some different options over here to the right, whether you'll want to send a social media post, send an email, make a phone call, things like that. But since it's before ABA Day, we're allowing people to send emails all up until that point. Then we're going to release all of those emails all at once at 9 a.m. on April 20th. So all I'm going to do is come up here, enter in my name, my home address, and we want to make sure and have our home address here because this is actually what pulls your members of Congress. So if you put a work address here, it might not actually get your correct House member. And then coming over here, we just want to add our email address and click submit. And from there, we'll be given full emails that we can either click send right now and it will be sent to our 2 senators and our representative, or like we know, we can go in and edit these things for more effect. And of course, one of the best ways that you can set yourself apart is by changing the subject line. Just coming in here and changing a few words. And just like that, it looks like a very different email coming in. Of course, we can also come in here and just add a quick paragraph. As a legal professional, I am deeply concerned with the lack of funding for LSC surrounding COVID relief efforts. And we've really done a lot to just make our email our own. Now, we want to go through and enter those for each of the different emails that we're going to send off. And then from there, we're going to just click submit. And just like that, we've actually sent emails to all 3 offices and making a real difference. One of the best parts about sending an email through our platform is that we actually have a partnership with the Hill. So every message sent through this portal is guaranteed to make it through congressional firewalls. We can either see here that we can go to the campaign page and take other steps, or we can sign up for the Washington Letter or the Grassroots Action Team right here. For right now, I actually want to go back and I want to show you some of the options that you can do over social media. So we're going to go down to the LSC specific page right now. And this is really your toolkit for all things LSC. We have our advocate function right here. We also have some great links to LSC along with a one-pager that you are able to download and either mail in or email in depending on whatever your meeting type is. We also have state-specific resources if you scroll all the way to the bottom. So you can actually find each one of your states. Go on here and find this, and you can actually go and find your exact district specific infographics. These things have great information with specifically just for, like, say, Texas's 1st district. We have things like rural residents, the amount of veterans that qualify for LSC, the amount of disaster declarations by state, and a lot of other information. But really the main things that we're going to focus on for our infographics are the fact that attorneys make all the difference in domestic violence cases and housing cases. But coming back from here, we're going to actually go and click on Advocate now. And we're actually going to look at what it's like to send a tweet. Now, since I've actually entered in my information already, it saves all of that. So all I have to do is go in and tell it what I want to go and do. I've actually already linked my Twitter account as well. So whenever I come up here, I can sit here, that's funny, and we can see the thank you email sent for sending the last letter. But right here for Tim Kaine, I know I want to send this over my Twitter account. So all I have to do is click tweet, and it's already plugged in right here. I can go in here and change things, and I can add even an image if I wanted to, or I can add another tweet. But this is really the mainstay, and all I have to do now is click tweet, and I've officially reached out to my member. Of course, while I'm here, I see ABA Grassroots has just sent out a post, so I'll go ahead and like that. But that's actually how easy it is for you to get online and send a message directly to your members of Congress. Of course, you can see here that we have several other options for you to tweet out, and we also have infographics and things like that. So going back to our ambar.org/ABA Day page, I'd also like to direct your attention further down the page, past the training videos and state captain information, to your social media toolkit. Now here's where we have set everything out for you with suggested posts, even hashtags that you can use. But really what we have here that is really valuable to you is these images that you can include on your posts. Like we said, we really want to focus on the fact that attorneys make all the difference in domestic violence and evictions cases. So I'm just going to come on here and I'm going to save my image as. I'm going to save that. And then when I'm going over to write my tweet, I can easily add my image right there. And it's a matter of just clicking that. And it's that simple. Of course, I'm not going to send that right now, but that is really some of the tools that we want to use on our website. So now we want to ask ourselves, what do we want to include in these social media posts that will actually take it to the next level and be heard above the noise? And for that, I'm going to take you back to our slides here and give you just a quick checklist of things that you can run through to make sure that your social media post has everything it needs. And number one, of course, first and foremost, is the ask. We need to have that come across in the post. We have that included in some of our pre-formatted ones, but if you're writing your own or filming your own video, you want to make sure and include that. Number two, you want to make sure and include the handle of whatever member of Congress you're trying to shout out in that post. And of course, again, that's included in your pre-formatted messages. But when you reach out on your own, you want to include that as well. You want to include the hashtag. In this case, it will always be ABA Day for us. So that way you can have the strength in numbers that social media brings with it. We don't want to just be one-off posts that just happen to be out there. We want to make sure and say that we're part of this team and part of this movement that's trying to push Congress in the right direction. Number four, we really want to include that we're a constituent. Best way to do that in under 240 characters is to just simply include your district as a hashtag at the very end. And that looks like, for instance, if you come from the 3rd District of Texas, you want to do a hashtag TX-3. If you come from the 7th District of California, you just want to have a hashtag CA-7. That gets across that you're a constituent while not taking up too many characters. And of course, if we can include a video or a photo, that really does take that message to the next level. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So that's why we have all of those resources on our website. Please feel free to go on there, click, save, and include those in your posts. Of course, there's nothing better than actually turning that camera on yourself, recording a short video, and then posting that to social media. There's honestly a few ways that you can get better at that. And then of course you want to make sure and include the ABA Grassroots in there as well, so that we can help bolster your message. We can like, we can retweet, we can comment, and we want to interact with you as much as you're interacting with the members of Congress. Now, we want to make sure that after you send these messages, this isn't the last time these congressional offices hear from you. And you can see by this slide, when it comes to these lobby days, we really get a lot of engagement around our congressional outreach. But then right after ABA Day ends, our engagement plummets with our members of Congress. So what we want to do is actually turn this year around and have a lot of messages go out throughout the year. And National Journal reached out to those congressional offices and asked, what is really a good amount of time for your constituents to reach back out? And it turns out 4 to 8 weeks is really that magic timeline. So we actually have a few things that we're planning in June that you can reach out and get involved in, or you can reach out and set up an in-district meeting. Hopefully by then the world will have started to open back up again and it will be safe for us to meet face to face. If that's the case, please reach out to us. We'd like to do anything we can to help with that. And then of course, please feel free to reach out to us in the Governmental Affairs Office. You are an extension of all of our advocacy efforts and vice versa. We represent you. So whenever you reach out, we want to make sure and mention that in our meetings and really grow from whatever you've shown them. Instead of coming in and saying, hi, I'd like to talk to you about this issue, and then that, congressional office saying, oh, thank you, we've actually already just got that information from a constituent. We can walk in and say, hi, I heard you just met with Jane or John Doe, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about some of the numbers behind those things. So please, by all means, anytime you reach out to these members of Congress, let us know so that we can go ahead and join in those efforts. And of course, we don't want you to just participate in ABA Day and then not turn around until next year or participate in any grassroots engagements. So we'd love for you to go on to our website at ambar.org/grassroots and join our grassroots action team. We have campaigns like this going throughout the year, and we can let you know about those things, and you can also access in-depth information, infographics, and hear from some stories that you might not be able to get anywhere else. You can also sign up to receive our Washington Letter, which is our monthly publication that includes incredible articles, great sections like legislative research tips, Advocate of the Month highlights, and also current events that might be of interest to you. Of course, if you actually have a relationship with a member of Congress or you'd like to grow one, we'd love to get you in our Key Contact program. And that you can simply do by going onto our website and filling out the form that's right about in the middle of the page and sending us a quick message. We'll be sure to reach out soon. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to kick it over to Cliff to really talk to us about what you can do to position your story to get the most impact out of it. And without further ado, Cliff, take it away.
And so what I've prepared for you today is a little bit of a research run. And I'll walk you through some of the things that we've identified as being real best demonstrated practices. But more specifically, we're going to talk about how you can use your personal story and how you can use a storytelling capability to really juice your advocacy outcomes. And so let me just sort of talk to you about what we've got in store for you today. So really sort of 5 major pieces that we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to open up with a little conversation about storytelling and whether it's an art or a science. It's important to identify that. If it is a science, it's something we can teach you. So very excited to share that with you. From there, we'll move into what the building blocks are of a story. So what are the necessary components that you need to have for your story to resonate? From there, we'll pivot into not just what the building blocks are of a story, but what a good story looks like and how that changes when you're actually lobbying a lawmaker or a policymaker. We'll talk about some briefly, just some common pitfalls, things that I've seen in past lobby days, things like that. And then finally, I'll introduce a Pixar framework that you can use to get started developing your own personal story. So with that, let me go ahead and get into the meat of the conversation here, which is all about whether or not storytelling is an art or a science. And to sort of help suss that out, what I want to do is I'm going to talk about what's on the left-hand side of the page here. So there's a gentleman named Christopher Bolger. This is back in the 1980s, and he was a story consultant at Walt Disney Pictures. But more than just being a story consultant, the man was a real film buff. I mean, this is a guy that got his thesis at USC Film School by studying Star Wars. So really, this is his craft. And he writes in his memoirs about how he had about a week off between gigs, and so he and his friends all holed up in their apartment there, and all they did was watch movies. But more importantly than watch movies, they also took notes the entire time because they wanted to identify what it was that made a movie a blockbuster versus a flop. After watching movies for that week, they distilled their findings into this memo on the left-hand side. This is a memo called The Hero's Journey. It turns out that storytelling is not an art. Storytelling is very much a science. And not only is it a science, it's a science with formulas. Turns out there are a specific set of adventures that a hero needs to go on for their narrative to be compelling. And as you can imagine, when he shared this memo with his employer, Walt Disney, they were very excited about it. He was the talk of all the backlot studios there in Hollywood. They immediately put a movie into production based on his memo. That memo, is responsible for a number of movies that Disney's created. But the one that really it drove most of its success is one that maybe you've heard of. It's a little out of date, but it's called The Lion King. And that was the first movie that Disney made based on the hero's journey. But it's not just the world of cinematography. In fact, it's also the world of original literature where you see this formula also playing out. That's on the right-hand side. This is a snapshot of the Star Wars plotline. And we've compared it with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And as you can see, young Harry follows almost the exact same set of adventures as Luke Skywalker did. We're just swapping out Ben Kenobi for Hagrid. And in fact, as you sort of follow through this, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap here. In fact, all the way down to that last line, all of this will be set to an orchestral score composed by John Williams. So the good news here is that storytelling is a formula. If it's a formula, that means we can teach it. It also means that we can rely on this formula to help develop our own stories. But one of the things that we wanted to also address is, I've talked about storytelling so far in the movies or even in a book. You're going to meet with lawmakers. You're not going to be in a darkened movie theater for an hour. You're probably not going to have a chance to read a chapter of your story. So we wanted to get a sense of, does this still hold true? Is there still a formula? Should we still be thinking about storytelling, even if we're in a time box situation? So even if we've got a minute or 2 minutes, does this matter? The answer is absolutely. Storytelling and getting it right is one of the most important things that you can do. And so to sort of underscore this, I've got a study. This is one that was done in 2014. It's out of the Journal of Marketing Theory and Practice, written by a couple of professors at Johns Hopkins. And what they did was they looked at Super Bowl ads. So 30, 60-second increments, very similar to what we're going to have when we go talk to those lawmakers. So 30, 60-second increments. And they wanted to understand what in this commercial will impact favorability and recall. And they measured a number of different things. They looked at over 100 different ads. They looked at the presence of humor, sex appeal, emotion, animals, music, as well as the number of narrative acts. And it turns out that when they ran the number and crunched the data, you could have dancing frogs playing guitars wearing bikinis. That's not going to drive favorability. It's not going to drive recall. What will drive favorability and recall is if you have those dancing frogs and bikinis playing guitars adhering to a classic 5-part narrative structure, right? Those things, you tell a classic story, right, with a 5-part narrative structure, it gets you a significant improvement in terms of recall rates as well as favorability. In fact, not only is this true, but they actually were able to forward project the best performing ads in the Super Bowls there in 2014 and 2015. You may remember some of these ads. I realize they're maybe 4 or 5 years old, but the Best Buds campaign is one that consistently rose to the top. You may remember it's a puppy. He's living on a farm, somehow ends up at the back of a pickup truck, goes to New York City, escapes, encounters wolves, and then finally the Clydesdales come in and bring him back to the farm. Sort of very classic sort of rising, falling action with a little bit of conflict. And so this is good news because if you think about it, we're now talking about improving recall rates. We're talking about improving, favorability. And we know that we can do this even in a time box situation. So this is beginning to emerge as a very powerful tool that we have in our toolbox. And a lot of that's because your brain is actually designed for stories. And so there's a number of things that happen here. And so I've got some data on the page. This is from a study, a team of neuroeconomists. These are folks that look at how the brain functions and how you make decisions. And they've identified there's 4 major things that happen. And so the first one is, if you tell a story, if you have conflict, you have to have conflict, it actually causes distress in the audience. And that's a good thing because their brains will release cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which actually will cause them to sit up and pay attention, right? Without the conflict in your story, you're not going to get their attention, right? So the story done correctly will drive that attention and that focus. But more importantly, not only do we now have our audience's attention, but now we're going to create a memory. Because if I tell you a story about I'm running down the beach or I'm running down the street, it's going to light up the same parts of your brain in the motor cortex as it would as if you were running down the street or running on the beach yourself. And so we're actually starting to imprint our story on the brain, which is why you can remember these things and retell them time and again. Telling a story also can activate the same parts of the brain of the audience or active the storyteller on an emotional level. So not just the motor cortex, but also on an emotional level as well. And then finally, when you resolve the story at the end, that's there at the bottom, you'll see that your brain also releases yet another hormone, that's oxytocin, known as the moral molecule, because it makes you more willing to help, more willing to be empathetic, and more willing to trust other people. So really, stories have tremendous power. This might be one of the most effective things that we can do from an advocacy perspective. It's also why so many lobby days fall short when they come in with that list of bullets, and that's that box on the right-hand side. Our brains are designed for stories. So when you hand me that list of 10 bullet points, I'm gonna remember two things. The first one, the last one, if we're lucky, maybe one in the middle. But I'm gonna remember your story, and I may tell that story again and again, and the lawmaker may tell that story from the House floor or from the Senate well. They may tell that story to the local newspaper. So stories can have real power and they can travel. And we can also make sure that we create memories here in our audience. Now, I realize that so far, I've sort of been talking about the power of stories, but I haven't really told you what goes into a story. And what I've got for you here on the page, a story, let's talk about what it is and what it's not. So a story has 5 major components. It has a character who's trying to achieve something. There is conflict, what's stopping them from achieving that goal. There's plot, which is how they go about achieving it another way, and then resolution. And a good story has all of these things. You have to have these 5 basic building blocks. And I say that because a lot of times people will confuse stories with other forms of discourse, commonly an argument or a narrative. That's over there on the right-hand side. A story is a component of that. It is not a replacement for this. And so the way I'd want you to think about this is an argument is a series of logical reasons, right, intended to persuade. But a story makes an argument much more powerful because now I've hit you on the logical side, but the story comes in and connects with you on an emotional side, right? And that's much, much more effective in terms of seeking specific policy outcomes. So a good story may be, again, one of the more powerful things that we actually have in our advocacy toolbox. Now, this is what the basic framework is for a story, but a good story in Washington is necessarily different than a story that you might tell to a larger audience or a larger group. And that's because of what I'm showing you here on this particular slide. So I've got the basic story hierarchy here in the pyramid, starting there at the bottom. So you've got your 5 basic building blocks, right? The character with a goal, conflict, plot, and resolution. Then in that middle layer, you've got what makes a good story. So we've got the building blocks, but no, the character's relatable, or maybe it's a famous person, right? Maybe the stakes are meaningful. It's well articulated, it's pacing, the storyteller's really engaging. Maybe it's emotional, right? That makes a story a good story. But a good story in Washington is different. And that's because our audience is an audience of one. In the moment when we go in to talk to that lawmaker, there is one person in the room that has the authority and the ability to do something. That's the person we want to influence. So we want to be thinking about not how we connect with folks on a mass consumption basis, but what are the values, what are the demographics, what are the experiences of that individual lawmaker, and how can we connect with this individual? The other piece here, and it's the next line down, is that a good story in Washington is representative and not extreme. Let me explain what that is. So when we talk about representative versus extreme, I'm always reminded, several years ago, there was an article that came out in the New York Times. It was about a man named James Robertson. Lived in a suburb of Detroit. And he walked 21 miles round trip through the snow and ice every day to get to work, all over the papers, provoked an outcry in the community. Ford Motor Company gave the man a car. They started a campaign. They raised $300,000 in charitable contributions to help support him. That's a fantastic outcome. No two ways about it. Absolutely amazing. But did it do anything to solve the larger policy challenge of access to public transportation in that suburb? No. And that's because when you go in with an extreme example, people want to solve that person's problem. They don't want to address the larger policy challenge that we're talking about. So make sure that your story is representative and not extreme. You can use a story of an individual person, but make sure you zoom out. So for example, if we were to tell a story of James Robertson, you might want to pull out and say, James is just one of 5,000 people that live in this suburb who have to do this every day. And that starts the conversation around this policy that you're seeking to support. The next piece there, paired with a call to action. Obviously, we want lawmakers to do something, and you got to ask them. You know, if you don't ask, you're not going to get what you want. So we need to make sure that we pair that story with an action. And then last but not least, there has to be some emotion to it, but that emotion needs to be grounded in policy relevance. And I say that because, you know, you can have emotion in it, but you need to make sure that the lawmaker has the ability to do something. You want to make sure that you're tying this back to an actual story and an actual policy that the lawmaker is in a position to do something. So that's sort of what makes a good story in Washington. So hopefully I've given you enough so far to start thinking about, okay, we need to have character, goal, conflict, plot, resolution. Okay, I'm kind of picking this up. I've got a good story. Starting to think about, maybe you've got some ideas. A couple other things I'll share with you before I get to the actual framework itself. I've been doing this for a long time, well over 20 years at this point. And I've seen enough lobby days to see where people do really well. And I've seen lobby days where people struggle. The common pitfalls that I've seen, make it personal, put a human face on it. I say that because many times organizations will come in for lobby days and they'll continually talk about the organization without actually putting a human face on the issue or on the story. So make sure that your story has a personal component to it. At the same time, tell your audience what you're going to tell them. Don't launch into your story right away. There is a little bit of a sort of a windup. You say, hey, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Congressman, I want to talk to you about this issue. It's really important to us. And while I'm at it, hey, you know, Ryan said this story about Eric's story. And let's talk about Eric's experience in the community and how this, you know, ties back to this policy we're talking about. Number 3, make it relatable, cut the jargon. Talk about this as if you're talking to your child or to your neighbor. I see that all the time, primarily with like healthcare or sort of professional societies. People will come in. Don't assume that your audience knows everything that you're talking about. And certainly try to avoid using jargon and acronyms. You know, instead of saying I'm a pulmonologist, say I'm a lung doctor. Like that's kind of what we're talking about, making things accessible. Number 4 is one that I cannot emphasize enough. Just as if you're trying to get to Carnegie Hall, you got to practice, practice, practice. It's not going to come easy. It's not going to come immediately. So you're going to want to practice on your family, practice on your colleagues, practice on Eric and the good folks at the ABA, but make sure that you practice. And when you practice in 1, 3, and 5 minute increments. This is more specific to an actual in-person meeting necessarily than a video call, but don't go in and assume that you're going to have the full 5 minutes. You may not. You may only have 3. You may get into the meeting and the lawmaker may say, oh, shoot, the buzzers went off. I've got to go vote, in which case you've got a minute. So make sure that you've practiced telling your story and there's a short, medium, and long. That way you can sort of fit it to the moment once you had a chance to read the room. And then the last piece is just use the Pixar formula to get started. It's what I'm going to show you next, and it's where we're going to land today. But really what this is a formula that Pixar uses, and you'll see this fits almost every single movie Pixar has ever written. Emma Coates is a storyboard artist. She put this framework together. You may know her from Brave, from Up, SpongeBob, the movie. So she's very prolific. And she said, look, it's a very simple framework. Once upon a time, there was blank, and every day blank, until one day blank. And because of that, now we're getting into the plot until finally, and then we resolve it. So once upon a time, There was a man named James Robertson. He lived in a suburb of Detroit. And every day, James worked 21 miles to get to his office. Until one day, there was a snowstorm that was really bad. And he slipped and fell and he hurt himself. This story got picked up in the local media. And because of that, Ford Motor Company gave him a car. And because of that, people rallied to his side and raised money for the community. And then they realized that, in fact, James was just one of many, until finally they began to have a conversation about addressing the public transportation challenges in that suburb of Detroit. And then happily ever after, ideally, this would be like, this is where you make the ask. And Congressman, Congresswoman, we could use support on this, right? This is where you might, put that component in. You can either resolve it, or you can resolve it in a way that leaves a little bit of open-ended, that you're asking the lawmaker to take an action based on that story. So let me go ahead and stop there. I want to hand it back to Eric, because I know Eric's got some ideas on the types of stories he's going to be looking for you all to share on your lobby day. Eric?
Thanks, Cliff. That's really interesting information to hear, and I've never heard that that's how they made The Lion King. I think you've killed a couple childhoods and made our Advocacy Day that much better all in one swoop. So thank you for that. But that's gonna go ahead and do it for us. But I would encourage you all to join us this Thursday for our last training session. And I look forward to seeing you all on April 20th and 21st for ABA Day. Please, again, go to ambar.org/ABA Day to access our entire toolkit. See our list of speakers and take action now and day of. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.